Hello there, my sleep fellows. Tonight, I invite you to gently close your eyes and drift into a world of enchantment. A tale awaits you, not loud, not rushed, but soft and lingering like the last light of day slipping through the tall windows of Hogwarts Castle. This is the story of a portrait. But not just any portrait. No, this one had a peculiar habit of moving, not just from frame to frame, like so many do in the magical world, but from wall to no wall at all. A painting that traveled on whispers, on glances, and sometimes on dreams. A portrait with no home, no canvas, no fixed place. Only a face, a gentle, knowing face that seemed to appear where it was needed most. The story begins, as many do, in a quiet corner of Hogwarts. It was that in-between time, just after dinner, when the halls start to settle into soft hushes and the common rooms glow with warm firelight. Outside, the moon had just begun its rise, scattering silvery ripples over the black surface of the Great Lake. And inside the ancient stone walls, the castle exhaled in contentment, its enchanted ceilings dimming to a cozy twilight. In Gryffindor Tower, the fire flickered gently in the hearth, casting lazy shadows that danced across the walls and bookshelves. Cushions had been tossed on the rug, books left half open, and mugs of cocoa steamed faintly on the side tables. Somewhere, the distant sound of Peeves laughing echoed through a stone corridor, then faded. All was calm. All was still. You might wonder how a portrait could wander without a wall. Well, you'll see. But for now, let us take a moment to settle in, breathe deeply, and let the soft hum of Hogwarts magic wrap around you like a worn velvet blanket. If you find comfort in this kind of quiet magic, where the mysteries are gentle and the night is full of soft wonder, don't forget to tap the like button, subscribe for more calming tales, and maybe, just maybe, explore a few more sleepy stories after this one ends. Because here in this world, portraits whisper, staircases shift kindly beneath your feet, and some secrets aren't meant to frighten, but to guide. So now, let us follow a soft trail of candlelight and see where the portrait goes next. At the heart of this story was a boy who never liked loud magic. Harry Potter, yes, the same Harry you've heard of before. Brave, quick with a wand, savior of the wizarding world. But tonight, he was just Harry, a little tired, a little thoughtful. Sitting by the fire with one sock off, the other half pulled down, toes warming near the hearth. His glasses rested on the edge of his nose, and his gaze wandered not toward the window or the door, but toward a very quiet, unremarkable patch of wall above the bookshelf. Then there was Hermione, curled up with a thick book, as usual. But her eyes weren't reading tonight. Not really. They drifted from word to word, then up toward the same patch of wall Harry kept glancing at. She'd noticed something too. A shimmer, maybe? A shadow? Or perhaps a presence. Not cold or eerie, just present. Like someone waiting patiently to be noticed. And Ron, slouched with a cushion over his face to block out the flickering firelight, grumbled every now and then about the draft. He hadn't seen anything, not yet. But he would, because this wasn't a story of grand spellcasting or wild adventures. This was a story of noticing the small things, of feeling something stir at the edge of your attention, something gentle. In the days before, Harry had spotted the portrait first, not on a wall, but reflected in a window. A round face framed in dark curls, smiling softly. When he turned around, no painting was there, but the warmth of the expression lingered in the room, like perfume from a memory. Hermione had seen the same face 2 days later, but in the cover of her book. For a single blink, the page had curled to reveal a painted woman seated in a velvet chair, her eyes twinkling as if amused at being discovered. Even Crookshanks, Hermione's clever half-Kneazle cat, had hissed one night into a mirror before immediately settling down, purring in a way he only did when around something was very old and very magical. It became a quiet fascination. The portrait who wasn't tethered, the painting that appeared in places where no painting had been before. Always watching, never speaking, yet the feeling it gave was kind, comforting, almost maternal. Harry never mentioned it out loud. Neither did Hermione, but both found themselves sitting more often by that bare patch of wall. Ron, meanwhile, began to feel oddly well-rested after naps in that corner, though he had no idea why. So it began: 3 friends, 1 portrait, and the quiet magic of something ancient unfolding not in shouts, but in sighs and soft glances. A magic that had waited long enough to be remembered. The first sign that the portrait was more than a curious coincidence came on a Tuesday evening. It had been one of those gently gray Hogwarts days, mist curling low around the castle, pressing softly against the tall windows like a sleepy cat. The common room was bathed in a muted amber glow from the hearth, casting flickers of gold across the stone walls. Rain pattered softly against the windows, as though the sky were humming a lullaby. Harry sat cross-legged on the rug, lazily toying with the corner of a parchment he didn't want to finish reading. Hermione had fallen asleep in a wingback chair, her book slipping sideways on her lap. And Ron had decided this was the perfect evening for his 3rd nap of the day, snoring gently beneath a blanket near the fireplace. It was peaceful, almost too peaceful. That's when it happened. The candle above the bookshelf, the one that had never once been lit, flickered to life. A soft foomp, like a sigh, a warm golden flame, as if the air itself had decided it needed just a little more light. Harry blinked at it. He hadn't waved his wand. No one had. The candle simply lit itself. But more curious than that was what the flame revealed. Just behind the candle, where stone should have been, a shimmer appeared, not a glow, not a flash, just a soft ripple, like heat above a summer road, and within it, the faint outline of a portrait, but not on the wall. In the wall. A figure was seated in a velvet chair, back straight, hands resting delicately in her lap. She looked to be in her 70s, maybe older, with deep smile lines around her mouth and eyes. Her dress was simple, a shade of twilight blue, and her hair was pulled into a soft bun at the base of her neck. Her eyes were closed, yet somehow Harry felt seen, as if the act of noticing her had stirred something in the air, a subtle pulse of old magic. Hermione stirred awake, blinking at the glowing candle. "Harry," she murmured, rubbing her eyes. "Why is that lit?" "I didn't touch it," he whispered, barely moving. She followed his gaze and gasped. Ron groaned from under the blanket. "What now?" he mumbled, but neither of them answered, because as they watched, the woman in the portrait slowly opened her eyes. There was no sudden jolt, no eerie music, just the soft inhale of presence, as though something very old and very kind had remembered the world again. The woman's eyes moved gently from side to side, taking in her surroundings. She didn't speak, didn't move beyond her gaze, but there was a clarity in her expression, not surprise, not confusion, but recognition. Hermione whispered, "She's looking right at us." "She doesn't have a frame," Harry said quietly. "She's just there." Hermione stood slowly, approaching the shimmer with cautious steps. The woman's eyes followed her, warm and still, and as Hermione reached out, not to touch, just to be close, the shimmer folded inward like mist being drawn into a bottle, and the portrait vanished. Gone. The candle remained, still burning steadily. Hermione took a step back, heart gently racing, but not from fear, from wonder. "She moved," she whispered. "Not just her eyes, the whole portrait. She was here, and then she wasn't." Ron groggily pulled the blanket down from his face. "What are you lot whispering about now?" "The woman," Harry said. "The one in the portrait." "Oh, right," Ron muttered, sitting up. "The imaginary portrait you keep spotting in things. She showed up again." Hermione looked over. "She was right there, Ron. You missed it." Ron blinked at the candle, then at the wall. "Well, if she's traveling without a frame, maybe she's on a holiday," he joked, trying to shake off the odd mood. "Wandering the walls. Portraits get bored too, right?" Harry didn't laugh. He looked thoughtful. "You ever heard of one that can move without a wall?" Hermione crossed her arms, brow furrowed. "Paintings in Hogwarts can move between their own frames if they're connected, but this, she's not moving through portraits. She's appearing where there isn't one." "That's not supposed to happen," Ron said, now wide awake. Hermione nodded. "Exactly." The common room felt a little different now. Not dangerous, just watched. Like something ancient had brushed past them, leaving behind a faint warmth in the air. That night, none of them spoke much about what they'd seen. Not directly, not even to each other. But when Harry went to bed, he left the curtains on his four-poster slightly open, just in case, and Ron turned his pillow to the cooler side, muttering something about wanting to dream of blue dresses and magic candles. The next morning, the candle was out again, but as Harry pulled on his jumper, something caught his eye in the mirror above his dresser. The woman. She was sitting quietly in her velvet chair, hands folded, staring not at him, but at her own reflection. And then, just as before, she faded. No frame, no signature, just a fleeting presence. He didn't tell the others right away. He simply tucked the moment into the pocket of his thoughts like a note he'd read over later. But that day, at breakfast, Hermione said something quietly to Harry between bites of toast. I think I saw her again, in the back of a spoon. Harry nodded slowly. Me too, in the mirror. Ron looked between them. Okay, now you're both seeing things. Harry smiled faintly. Maybe we are. Hermione leaned in. What if she's not bound to any one object? What if she's bound to memory? Ron groaned. Please don't start talking in riddles before I've had pumpkin juice. But Harry's mind was already spinning gently, not in circles of panic, but of peaceful curiosity, the kind that drifts like clouds, soft, slow, persistent. If the portrait could appear where she was remembered, then maybe she wasn't really gone at all. Maybe she had never truly left. She was a whisper, a warmth, a story waiting to be noticed, and somewhere, just beyond the reach of candles and reflections, she waited, smiling. The days that followed were like ripples in a still pond, subtle, quiet, and slowly expanding. The mysterious portrait didn't appear again in a mirror or a spoon, at least not at first. But strange little moments began to bloom like soft petals across the quiet hours of Hogwarts. Not frightening, not loud, just curious. It began with sounds, faint humming behind walls where no one walked, the delicate rustle of fabric in otherwise empty corridors. Once, Harry paused near the library's tall arched entrance, hearing the soft click of knitting needles, but when he peeked inside, no one was there. Hermione, always analytical, began keeping a list. In the small notebook she carried everywhere, beneath her arithmancy notes and tucked beside ancient runes translations, she began a new section titled Unframed Portrait Events. Each entry was delicate, nothing was conclusive, just observations written with careful curiosity. Soft rustling behind bookshelf, second floor near Charms Corridor. Candle lit briefly, then out. Noticed the faint scent of lavender when walking past tapestry near Potion's dungeon, no flowers nearby. Saw reflection of the woman again, not in glass, but in shadow, cast against the wall of the stairwell. She waved. The entries weren't frantic, they weren't urgent, they were quiet, whispers of wonder. One evening, as the trio sat beneath the window alcove in the common room, Hermione whispered, "I think she's trying to tell us something." Ron raised an eyebrow, nibbling the corner of a biscuit. Like what? That she prefers wool over silk? No, she said gently. I think she's guiding us. Harry looked out the window, watching the light rain trace soft silver lines down the glass. But to where? Hermione didn't answer, not right away, because just then, as if in response to the question, the candle on the opposite side of the room lit itself. Not the one near the bookshelves this time. A new one. This one above the portrait of Barnabas the Barmy, the one where he kept failing to teach ballet to trolls. The flame danced gently, and as they watched, the background of the painting behind Barnabas shimmered, faintly, almost dreamlike. And just for a moment, behind the swirling chaos of the trolls and tutus, the outline of the blue-dressed woman appeared again, seated calmly, not part of the portrait's story, but gently layered behind it, as if two paintings had softly overlapped. Hermione stood slowly, The air was thick with warmth, not heavy, not stifling, but full, like a room that had just been blessed. She approached the painting. The trolls didn't notice her. Barnabas kept waving his wand at their feet in vain. But the woman, she turned her head ever so slightly. Then, without a sound, a soft whisper rolled through the room. A whisper not in words, but in feeling, a beckoning. Hermione raised a hand, fingers just a breath away from the canvas. And with that one motion, the painting did something no Hogwarts painting had done before. It deepened, not visibly, not like a portal opening or the walls shifting. It simply drew inward. Its depth increased in feeling rather than form, and Hermione vanished. Harry blinked. Hermione? But there was no cry, no flash, no rattle of spellwork, just silence. Ron leapt up, mouth open, wand half raised. Where did she go? Harry looked at the candle, still burning, the shimmer behind the portrait, still present. He stepped forward, heart steady despite the uncertainty, and touched the edge of the frame. And then, like a dream you realize too late is a dream, the common room faded from around him. Not into darkness, but into softness, into velvet silence. He found himself standing on a narrow path that glowed faintly beneath his feet, as though lit by forgotten moonlight. Mist curled along the ground, thick but not cold. The air smelled faintly of lavender and parchment and candle wax, familiar and comforting. Hermione, he called gently. Here, came her voice from just a few steps ahead. He followed the glow to find her standing at the edge of a small, circular clearing, not outdoors, not indoors, somewhere in between. A space made of warmth and memory, stitched together by quiet magic, and in the center, a chair. The chair, velvet blue, empty, but hovering just beside it, floating in the mist, was something new. A frame, not yet solid, almost shy in its construction. It shimmered at the edges, as if waiting for permission to fully appear, and within it, hanging gently in the air, were brushstrokes. Soft ones, the beginning of a face, the woman's eyes, just her eyes, painted first, calm, knowing, kind. She's building her own portrait, Hermione whispered. Ron appeared beside them with a thud and a shout. Oi, where am I? What is this? Harry chuckled, even as his heart swelled. We're still at Hogwarts, he said quietly. Just not the Hogwarts we know. The space around them shimmered with familiar shapes in unfamiliar forms. The outline of staircases made of memory, echoes of whispers from favorite corridors. And gently tucked into the mist were small orbs of light, glowing softly like sleeping thoughts. She's been collecting places, Hermione said. Pieces of the castle, maybe even people's memories of her. That's how she's moving. Not on walls, not in mirrors, but through memory. Ron stared. That's a bit eerie. No, Harry said. It's beautiful. They stepped closer to the forming portrait. The eyes didn't blink, but they glowed with recognition. And then, from the mist, something else began to shape. A sound, soft music, a lullaby made of wind chimes and water droplets. The kind of melody that belongs to forgotten nurseries and enchanted rocking chairs. The painting's frame solidified just a little more. Hermione looked at the others. I think we're supposed to help her finish it. How? Ron asked. We're not exactly artists. But Harry understood. She's showing us what she's made of, he said, where she's been, what she remembers. If we walk through this space, maybe we help give it form. They turned toward the glowing path. It split into 3 directions, each one humming softly with invitation. Without a word, they began to walk, and as they walked, memories of Hogwarts began to bloom around them. A bubbling cauldron in potions class, a feather drifting in midair from their first Wingardium Leviosa spell, the scent of treacle tart from a late-night kitchen visit, and always, in the corner of these memories, the faint outline of the woman, watching, listening, smiling, sometimes seated, sometimes standing in the distance, always just far enough to feel like a dream, but close enough to be real. She wasn't haunting, she was holding the space, holding the memory, holding the magic, and gently, without fanfare, her portrait filled itself in more and more. Each moment walked, adding a new stroke, a new detail. Her hands, her shawl, a background of soft gray stone that resembled the North Tower. Ron stopped suddenly and pointed. Look. In the space behind them, the painting was now floating higher, not framed on any wall, but simply suspended, and below it, a name had appeared. Irene of the Hollow Hall. Hermione exhaled. She was real. She still is, Harry whispered. They stood in the misty stillness, watching the completed portrait slowly begin to drift away, not fading, not vanishing, but returning to where it had once belonged. And as it went, the candle above Barnabas the Barmy flickered softly in the real world. Then, with the gentlest whisper of gratitude, it went out. The portrait had returned, but not to the common room, not to the frame above Barnabas the Barmy, not even to a wall. It now hovered quietly in the astronomy tower, not hanging, not fixed, but gently suspended in midair, like a feather caught in a dream. The next morning, word spread quietly. A few students said they saw a glowing shimmer drifting up the tower steps. Others heard distant music when climbing the spiral stairwell. Professor Sinistra simply noted that the large telescope lens had been unusually warm, as if it had absorbed candlelight overnight. But no one saw the portrait itself, except Harry, Hermione, and Ron. And only when the tower was empty, blanketed in early twilight. She was seated now, not just a face, but full in form, her shawl blue as moonlight, her hair coiled into soft braids, and her eyes, always her eyes, still held that same ancient calm, the kind of gaze that said, I have watched centuries pass and still find beauty in each one. Beneath her portrait, not on a plaque, but in faint gold light, hovering like mist, the name remained. Hermione carried her notebook everywhere now. She'd added tabs, spells for preservation, and even a few protective enchantments, not to keep the portrait in, but to help remember the strange, soft trail Irene left behind. Look at this, she whispered one evening in the library. She flipped to a page with a sketch she had made, a map of the castle overlaid with little symbols. Every time she appears, She leaves something behind, a scent, a song, a flicker of movement. She's retracing something. Ron squinted at the page. Retracing what? Hermione paused. I think her final walk, the last time she moved freely through Hogwarts. She's remembering. Harry tapped the parchment gently, and if we follow that path, we might learn why she stayed. That night, they followed a thread of warmth, not a visible thread, but a sense. A hush in the air, a pull in their chests, like the castle itself was humming a lullaby only they could hear. Through the tapestry corridor on the third floor, past the statue of the sleeping knight, down a spiral staircase none of them had noticed before, one not on the Marauder's map. Every step felt like they were being folded deeper into a dream, until finally they reached a door, not grand, not glowing, just a wooden door, aged and arched with no handle, only a small circular impression in the center. Harry raised a hand and touched it. The wood rippled softly, like a pebble dropped into still water, and the door opened inward. Inside was a chamber neither large nor small, stone walls wrapped in tapestries too faded to name, a single table in the center, and on it, a candle, not lit, not enchanted, just waiting. Hermione stepped forward first. She looked around the room, eyes wide, but not afraid. This place wasn't built for lessons or dueling, she said softly. This was a resting place, a remembering place. Ron walked around the room's edge, brushing dust from an old chair, more like a forgotten cupboard. But then the air shifted, the candle lit itself, a soft blue flame, and the air filled with the scent of rosemary and rain. From the candle's glow, shapes began to rise, not ghosts, not spirits, but memories, not their own, Irene's. They unfolded slowly, like ink soaking into parchment. A vision of Irene walking these very halls, robes brushing the floor. Another of her seated beside a window, humming to herself while holding a letter. Then, an image of her standing before the headmaster's office, eyes full of worry. The door remained closed. She turned away. The next showed her placing a scroll into the hollow of a wall behind a tapestry of dancing vines. Then, darkness. The memories paused, the candle flickered, and a quiet voice echoed through the chamber, not loud, not demanding, just a whisper made of stars and wind. You must find the hollow hall. My truth sleeps there still. Hermione's eyes widened. The hollow hall. It's not just a name, it's a place. Harry looked at her. Do you think it's still in the castle? It must be, but hidden, like this room. Ron crossed his arms. And how exactly do we find something that's literally hollow? Hermione smiled. With patience. The next few days were filled with gentle searching. They didn't rush. They listened. They let the castle guide them. One evening, the sound of wind through the pipes near the music corridor led them to a whispering alcove. There, behind a loose brick, was a scroll, old and sealed with blue wax. Inside, a poem. Where stairs don't meet, but walls remember, between the echoes, past the ember, a door once locked, now dreams alone, beneath the bell, behind the stone. They read it 3 times, each slower than the last. Harry traced the lines with his finger. Beneath the bell, that must be the bell tower. Hermione nodded. Behind the stone, there's a statue near the base of the bell tower. A lion, I think. Ron groaned. That thing's heavy as a hippogriff. But when they reached it the next day, the lion had shifted, just slightly, enough to reveal a seam in the floor beneath its paw. A small trap door, barely noticeable. It didn't open easily, but it welcomed them. Below it was a narrow stairwell lit by soft blue flame, the same as Irene's candle. The hollow hall wasn't grand. It was still, a chamber of memory, quiet and full of time. On the far wall, her portrait waited, no longer hovering. It rested, framed in old stone, lit by its own calm glow. Below it, an inscription. I stayed not for vengeance, nor for fear. I stayed for those who forget to remember, for silence is not absence, and memory is a kind of magic. They stood in silence, feeling something ancient settle in their bones. Not sadness, peace. Irene had never haunted. She had held on, not because she couldn't move on, but because the quiet spaces of Hogwarts still needed her, and in those spaces she had left pieces of herself, not to frighten, but to remind, to hold the hush between spells and the warmth between footsteps. She was the guardian of forgotten corners, the whisper in old staircases, the comfort in candlelight. They stood for a long while. No one spoke, because in that room, silence was sacred. And slowly, gently, the portrait smiled, not dramatically, not mystically, just contentedly, as if to say, "You found me, thank you." And then, from behind them, the bell above began to chime, not loud, not urgent, just a single, soft note, a note that echoed through stone and memory. And far above, in the heart of the castle, every candle flickered at once, not in fear, but in gratitude. The hollow hall became their quiet secret, not hidden in the way maps might miss it, but hidden in the way lullabies are, tucked between notes, only fully heard when the world is quiet enough to listen. In the days that followed, Harry, Hermione, and Ron returned often, sometimes all together, sometimes one by one, not to investigate, not to solve, but simply to sit, to breathe, to feel. The portrait of Irene no longer moved. She no longer traveled across corridors or vanished from one frame to reappear in another. She had found her resting place. But somehow she still spoke, not through words, but through presence. A shift in air when someone entered the room with worry. A warmth on the stone bench when one needed comfort. A soft hum when silence grew too heavy. It was Hermione who first noticed the threads of choice woven quietly through the chamber. On one visit, she found a second candle near the base of the portrait, not lit, not warm, but new. Next to it, a faded scroll had appeared, its writing barely visible in the flickering glow. What you learn in stillness, choose to carry. What you carry, choose to share. For memory is not a burden, it is a lantern. She read the lines 3 times, then turned to Harry and Ron. She's giving us the choice, Hermione said softly, to keep this knowledge, this peace, tucked away, or to share it and let it ripple. Ron looked uneasy. Telling people there's a secret room under the bell tower with a memory portrait that moves and whispers. might get us sent to see Madame Pomfrey. Harry smiled faintly. But maybe it's not about telling everyone. Maybe it's about what we do with what we felt here. Hermione nodded, like paying attention to the quiet corners, looking after forgotten places, making room for memory, even if it's not ours. They sat with that thought, and slowly, choices began to bloom. Harry returned a week later with a small journal, empty pages, bound in dragonhide. He placed it on the table beneath Irene's portrait and whispered, "For anyone who needs a place to write what they can't say." Hermione brought with her a charm of preservation and softly cast it on the room itself, her wand humming gently as she whispered incantations not meant for protection, but for peace. "So the room remembers," she said, "even if we forget." Ron, after much hesitation, brought a small box of sweets, not magical, just warm and sugary, and left them on the bench. "In case someone stumbles in after a rough day," he mumbled. "Bit of sugar helps." Irene's smile seemed to brighten, just a little. Over time, the room gently responded. On rainy days, it smelled like firewood and parchment. On cold mornings, a soft blanket appeared folded on the chair. The stone never grew damp, the candles never burned low, and no one who entered ever felt alone. One evening, as winter pressed against the windows of the castle, Hermione asked the question they all carried in the back of their minds. Why was she forgotten? They were sitting again in the hollow hall, the three of them, cloaked in soft scarves and the comfort of candlelight. Ron shrugged. Hogwarts is old. Loads of things get lost. Harry, thoughtful, looked at the portrait. But maybe she wasn't lost, maybe. She chose to fade, to stay in the background, so she could listen. Hermione smiled, a little sadly. Imagine that, choosing to be forgotten so others could be remembered. That night, they made another choice. They left a page in the journal blank, but wrote one line at the top in golden ink. For those who remember quietly. A few weeks later, a first-year Hufflepuff, looking for a quiet place to cry after missing home, stumbled down the wrong stairwell. She found the hollow hall. She didn't ask questions. She sat. She wept. She felt the warmth of the candlelight. She wrote in the journal she left with lighter shoulders. The next day, Harry noticed a tiny sketch had appeared beside Irene's portrait, a gentle drawing of a flower growing from stone. He didn't say a word. But that night, he smiled in his sleep. One by one, others found the room, not because it was marked, not because it was mentioned, but because some corners of the castle whispered when they were needed. And in those moments, choices unfolded like petals. Some left poems, some left letters they never intended to send. One student left a single feather and a note. For the part of me I had to let go. Another left a lullaby, and all the while Irene watched, not in judgment, not in pride, but in peace, because what she had guarded for so long, the memory of being remembered, was now gently alive in others. Not loudly, not famously, just quietly, as if Hogwarts itself had taken a long, slow breath and whispered, "Thank you." And every time the wind moved through the bell tower, it sounded almost like the soft hush of a portrait smiling, not with lips, but with love. The story was no longer just about her. It was about everyone who chose to carry stillness into the noise. Harry leaned forward, eyes wide with quiet awe. "What do you mean?" Irene's hands moved gently in her lap. "There are places at Hogwarts that remember, not because they are enchanted, but because someone loved them enough to leave a part of their peace behind." She looked at him, really looked. "You are not the first to find stillness here." And with that, the portrait shifted again, slowly, gently, as if revealing a secret it had kept for generations. The painted room widened, and within it appeared the faint figures of students, old robes, unfamiliar house crests, quiet faces deep in thought. Not ghosts, not echoes, but memories. One by one, they flickered into view, reading, writing, sitting by invisible fires, some smiling softly, some lost in thought, some leaning their heads on one another's shoulders. A long lineage of quiet. Irene nodded toward them. "These are the ones who chose silence over spectacle, who carried peace as a kind of magic." Harry stared, his heart full. He could feel them, not like a crowd, not like a crowding in his mind, but like support. As if every student who had sat in this room had left a thread behind, and together those threads had become a tapestry strong enough to hold up anyone who needed it. And then Irene said something that would stay with him forever. "Sometimes the most powerful magic is the kind that holds you when no one else does." Harry felt something shift inside him, not a dramatic revelation, not a burst of energy, but a gentle rearranging, a settling like puzzle pieces clicking into place after years of not knowing there was a puzzle at all. It wasn't about defeating Dark Lords. It wasn't about glory or recognition or house points. It was about showing up, gently, truly, for the parts of Hogwarts and the parts of himself that didn't need fixing, just witnessing. Irene looked toward the painted journal in her portrait's room. "In time," she whispered, "this room will sleep again. It always does, but the ones who need it will wake it." The candle flickered. The portrait softened. Harry stood. He didn't say goodbye. It didn't feel necessary. Instead, he walked to the real journal, the one on the table beside him, and turned to a new page. With quiet hands, he wrote, "There is a portrait that leads to a place where silence listens back. If you find it, leave behind something kind. If you don't, know it still holds you anyway." And with that, he closed the book. The room seemed to exhale around him, the candles flickering like stars dimming in a peaceful sky. Outside, the snow had thickened, but the halls of Hogwarts glowed with the kind of warmth that doesn't come from fireplaces, the warmth of stories carried, of memories shared. As Harry walked back toward the common room, he felt the threads of the hollow hall tug gently at his sleeve, not to call him back, but simply to say, "You are part of this now." And deep in the castle, beneath the bell tower, the portrait of Irene shimmered once more and smiled as the soft golden glow of dawn began to seep through the high arched windows of the castle. Everything within the hidden dungeon began to shimmer with a warm and fading light. The flickering candle, which had once burned with mysterious intent, now stood calmly at the center of the chamber, its flame no longer guiding, but simply glowing, like the steady heartbeat of a night that had fulfilled its secret. Luna stood near the mural of the cloaked figure, her hand still resting gently on the ancient stone as though in quiet conversation. A peace had settled over her, not the rush of discovery or the thrill of danger, but a deep inner stillness, the kind of calm that arrives only after a long and thoughtful dream. She smiled softly to herself, as if the dungeon had whispered its last words just for her, and she was tucking them away in her heart like folded notes in a book. She turned slowly and walked back through the winding corridor. The gentle echo of her footsteps in the stone hall no longer sounded lonely. They sounded like closure. As she reached the spiral stairs leading back to the upper halls, the candle's light followed her no further. It chose instead to stay behind, casting a protective warmth over the place it had revealed. It would wait again, silent and still, until someone else needed to remember that courage often begins with curiosity, and comfort can be found in the softest flickers of light. Above, the castle had already begun to stir. House elves moved about the kitchens, preparing warm porridge and tea. An owl flitted past the tower, wings wide and weightless against the rising light. The great clock had not yet chimed, but morning was coming. Luna stepped back into her dormitory and gently closed the door behind her. The shadows in the room were soft, and the curtains fluttered ever so slightly with the early breeze. She sat down on her bed, her shoes still dusty with memories from beneath the castle. A parchment lay on her nightstand, one she had written on days ago with questions she had long wanted answers to. She looked at it now, not because she needed the answers anymore, but because she knew the journey was the answer. Her eyes grew heavier. The candlelight she had carried, though no longer in her hand, seemed to linger around her like a comforting hug, gently reminding her that bravery didn't always shout. It often whispered, especially in the quiet hours of the night. She tucked herself into the soft, waiting sheets. Outside, the sky was turning from rose to gold, and the castle, ancient and vast, stood watch as it always had. Below, the hidden dungeon rested in silence once more, wrapped in memory, wrapped in warmth. Luna exhaled slowly and deeply, and then, like the candle that had led her, she dimmed into a peaceful sleep. So now, my dear sleepy soul, as the soft night air still hangs gently outside your window, and the stars begin their slow fade behind the morning mist, let your heart feel quiet and full. What began with a simple candle has become a quiet memory, like an old photograph tucked into the pages of a storybook. Luna's adventure reminds us that magic doesn't always roar. Sometimes it hums softly in the quiet corners of ancient walls. It flickers in candles we almost forget. It echoes in passages we never noticed before, and it lives, ever so gently, in the curiosity we carry inside us when the world is still and the hour is late. The hidden dungeon, wrapped in warm shadows, is now resting once again beneath the castle stones, undisturbed, its mysteries tucked back into silence. But perhaps one day, when someone else finds themselves holding a strange little candle and wondering why it flickers in a room with no breeze. The story may begin again. And that's the beauty of Hogwarts, isn't it? There is always more than what we see. Portraits whisper, books remember, walls breathe with secrets. And even the most ordinary evening can unfold into something quietly extraordinary if we're open to wonder. So rest now. Feel safe within the folds of your blanket, just as Luna felt safe beneath the stars and stone. Know that the castle still watches, with all its gentle corners and kindly ghosts, its shifting staircases and sleepy portraits, and it holds a place for dreamers like you. Let the echoes of candlelight guide you to soft dreams, where magic is never far, and peace is just a breath away. The night is still kind, the world is still wide, and you, dear listener, are exactly where you need to be. Close your eyes now. Breathe in slow. The candle has done its work. Sleep well in your own chamber of comfort and calm.